Okay, thank you. First, I would like to thank Frank for inviting me to do the presentation and the discussion. My name is Chao Chen. Right now, I'm doing my PhD study at the Free University of Berlin in Germany. My research topic is about China's Belt and Road Initiative. That's why I have asked the last speaker about China-Pakistan economic corridor because it's really one part of my research. CPEC, the so-called CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is the flagship project of China's Belt and Road Initiative. But maybe you know, China's BRI project is huge, tremendous. I'm researching this project from a strategic perspective because my research interests are about strategy, grand strategy, geopolitics, geoeconomics, and so on. So it's my great pleasure to talk about the U.S.-China strategic competition today. As Frank has introduced, right now I'm doing my PhD study at the Free University of Berlin. But before my academic career, I have worked for Huawei Technologies in various countries, including India, Africa, and Germany. But I'm really interested in strategy and international relations. That's why I have ended my job and started to study at the German University. So this is my personal story. Again, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the Sino-American strategic competition, which is probably the most important geopolitical issue of today's world because both China and USA are very powerful. They are the two superpowers. So I think the outcome of the Sino-American strategic competition probably will determine the fate of mankind in the 21st century, and of course, the international order. So that's why I really appreciate the opportunity. Before my presentation, actually, I have not prepared PowerPoint slides, and Frank has connected some questions from the audience, from the participants of today's discussion. So I really appreciate. I would like to answer these questions briefly first. It takes maybe half an hour, and then we can have further and deep discussing. So, yeah, let's look at the questions first. The first questions are about the United States. So I'm looking at the questions. The first question, which are the reasons for the fundamental changes in U.S. politics, especially in international relations? This is a big question, really big question. So I think the United States has experienced tremendous change over the past decades. I mean, since the end of the Cold War, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the U.S. foreign strategy and policy has experienced tremendous change. Immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's the era of globalization or liberal globalization. The United States, as well as Western countries, want to expand the so-called liberal international order to the entire world globally. And this is so-called hyper-globalization. And many countries, many people have benefited from this wave of globalization. I think China is probably the largest beneficiary of last wave of globalization. So I think globalization has changed the world, including China, Europe, and the United States, of course. I think United States has also benefited from the globalization initiated by itself are not. But the distribution of the benefits is not equal. I think Wall Street and Silicon Valley are probably the biggest winner, but not all of them, not all Americans have benefited from the globalization, especially the middle class, the work class, the people who live in the middle and central United States. They have not benefited as much as Wall Street and Silicon Valley. That's why many Americans are not satisfied with globalization, because globalization brings immigration, and immigration is a big topic, a huge topic of the U.S. domestic politics, and globalization leads to outsourcing. So the manufacturing industry of the U.S. Has been outsourced to China and Southeast Asia countries, and the service industry of the U.S. has been outsourced to India, maybe. So that's why the U.S. Has lost a lot of job opportunities. That's why many American citizens are not satisfied. So I would say the first reason of the fundamental change of U.S. Politics is globalization. And the second is related to globalization. I think it's the rise of China. China has developed very fast over the 4 decades. This is true. China has made huge achievements in any terms, economically, geopolitically, military, technologically. I think China has risen. This is a reality. But this change of the global power distribution has tremendous consequence. Immediately after the end of the Cold War, I think the U.S. has launched globalization, but after the 9/11 in 2001, the U.S. has focused on the war on terror, right? That time, China was still a partner of the United States. But right now, the U.S. has realized that China has risen, and China has become one strategic competitor of the U.S. Maybe I think it's number one strategic competitor of the U.S. I still remember the U.S. National Security Strategy, which was published in 2017. It's the first time since 1972 China was labeled as a strategic competitor of the U.S. before Russia, right? China is before Russia. Okay, this is a fundamental change of the U.S. foreign strategy. Over the past, the U.S. has tried very hard to integrate China into the so-called liberal international order. They wish China will become more liberal, closer to the U.S. and Western countries. But right now, they have realized the U.S. has failed to achieve that objective. That's why the U.S. has changed its foreign strategy. Fundamentally, I think right now they perceive China as the strategic competitor of the U.S. So that's the second reason of the change in U.S. politics, its rise of China. And the last reason I would like to emphasize is the fall of Russia. I think the fall of Russia is still not over. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia is continuously falling. Now, Russia is still falling. If you look at the economy and the population of Russia, the situation is very bad. Right now, both the economy and the population of the Russia are just 10% of China. So therefore, Russia is no longer a strategic threat of the U.S. Russia is not in the position to threaten U.S. Like previously, like Soviet Union. No, So that's why the U.S. is changing its foreign policy toward Russia. Russia is now not strong, but weak. But actually, a weak Russia is not in the interest of the United States. U.S. needs a strong Russia to counterbalance the growing influence of EU and China, of course. Therefore, we have seen a notable change in U.S. foreign policy. Now, the people in Europe are talking about the hostility of the U.S. toward Europe, and they are not happy because right now U.S. is very friendly to Russia and hostile toward Europe. This has been demonstrated in the latest U.S. national security strategy. So the fall of Russia is also an important reason for me to explain the change of the U.S. politics. Three reasons: globalization, the rise of China, and the fall of Russia are the most important reasons of the U.S. Policy shift. Okay, so this is the answer for the first question. Probably I should answer the questions briefly because of the time is limited. Okay. The second question: do you see any signs of an U.S.-American retrenchment in world affairs? I think this is a broad perception that Trump will withdraw from international stage. Trump will pursue the foreign policy. Trump will pursue the isolationist foreign policy. But I have carefully gone through many documents and I have followed the policy change of the U.S. Government. My answer is no. Trump is anything but an isolationist. Why do I argue that Trump is still involved? Trump is still deeply involved in the world politics. I have reasons and evidence. First, Trump is trying to expand the U.S. Military budget. He is trying to increase the U.S. military budget to the unprecedented level, more than $1 trillion US. Okay, this is unbelievable. This is more than 30 countries after the United States combined in terms of military budget. This is not the sign that the U.S. will withdraw from the world stage. Instead, U.S. will enhance its military presence worldwide, maybe not in the Europe, but in Asia, in the so-called Indo-Pacific theater. U.S. will significantly increase its military presence because right now, U.S. perceives China as the #1 strategic competitor. And U.S. will strengthen its power and influence in the Western Hemisphere. And if we look at the national security strategy, it's clear that the U.S. perceives the Western Hemisphere as the #1 strategic theater. So there is no sign that the U.S. will withdraw from international stage. The reality is the opposite. So this is my argument. Trump is anything but an isolationist. And next question. In how far do you think the current U.S. presidency is based on a bipartisan Republican and Democratic Party commitment for its politics? Yeah, I think this question is very interesting. For many people, the U.S. Is polarized, not only the government, but also the ordinary people and the civil society. The Democrats and the Republicans have different opinion for each and every issue, and they fight against each other fiercely. Yes, it's true, but on the other hand, the U.S. still has some consensus between Democrats and the Republicans. If you are talking about the foreign policy, I have found some consensus between the two parties. For example, the first is about foreign policy for the middle class. Actually, this is a slogan from Biden administration. They want to pursue a foreign policy for the middle class. I think this is similar to the populist foreign policy of Trump administration, American first foreign policy. It's similar. The Biden administration has used another term to express a similar idea, foreign policy for the middle class. And Biden administration has also tried very hard to bring the manufacturing industry back to the United States, and they want to promote benefits for the working class, for the middle class. So this is similar to Trump's American first foreign policy. And second, the consensus between Democrats and the Republican, it's the American policy toward China. Both parties perceive China as a strategic competitor, number one strategic competitor. And both administrations have tried very hard to contain China's power and influence. Of course, their approaches are not completely same. There are differences between two parties, but the objective, the purpose is the same. They want to contain China. They want to stop China from challenging U.S. hegemony. So that's why I believe there is a consensus between Republicans and Democrats when it comes to the strategic competition with China. And the third consensus from my point of view is that both Democrats and Republicans are pushing very hard to urge the airlines and partners of the U.S. to take more responsibility, especially in European continent and Indo-Pacific theater. In Europe, there is a big trouble for European country. It's the Russia invasion of Ukraine. The war has the war is ongoing. Okay, the war broke out almost 4 years ago, but it's still ongoing. This is number one strategic threat for European stability. Over the past, European countries and Ukraine are dependent on the U.S. support economically, military, and morally. But right now, the U.S. has realized it has more important work to do. U.S. wants to focus on Asia. U.S. wants to focus on China. Therefore, U.S. is not in the position to fight against Russia in Europe and China in Asia simultaneously. So that's why the U.S. is pushing its European airlines to take more responsibility in supporting Ukraine. This is happening. Okay. The NATO countries have promised to increase its military budget, defense spending to 5% of their GDP. Actually, from my point of view, this is one huge achievement of Trump administration. Before Trump, many American presidents have accused European countries of taking too little responsibility, especially in defense spending. But they have failed to change European countries' position. Right now, Trump administration has successfully achieved that. Of course, the price is very high. Trump has used very ugly means to achieve that purpose. Therefore, the consequence is very high for the United States, especially for the U.S. soft power. These are the three consensus from my perspective between Democrats and Republican when it comes to U.S. foreign strategy and policy. And next question, do you see any U.S. American grand strategy? So this question is interesting from my point of view because many people believe the U.S. Politics is chaotic and the U.S. foreign policy is inconsistent, incoherent. Trump and Biden are typical example. So Trump has changed Biden's policy fundamentally. For example, Biden wants to stay in the WTO, World Health Organization, but Trump has withdrawn from WTO and other international institutions like the UN institutions, some institutions of the UN, like the UN Science, Technology, Education, and Culture Organization. So this is an example that the U.S. foreign policy is inconsistent. But I would argue that the U.S. still has a consistent, coordinated, and coherent grand strategy. Each and every American government, I mean the U.S. federal government, has the obligation to make one national security strategy. Recently, 2 weeks ago, the Trump administration has published its latest national security strategy. This is actually a grand strategy, a formal and a written document to explain U.S. grand strategy. And the U.S. has very strong strategic capabilities, in my opinion. People always argue U.S. Foreign strategy or foreign policy are not consistent, but the reality is the opposite. For example, during the Cold War, I mean, the U.S. has pursued a containment grand strategy against the Soviet Union for almost half century. This is consistent. This is coordinated and coherent. Yes, different administrations have changed their approach, but the grand strategy has been consistent. They have achieved their strategic objective. In the end, Soviet Union collapsed. This is the evidence that the U.S. federal government is able to define and implement grand strategy. And today, when it comes to China, the number one strategic competitor of the U.S., we have seen both Republican and Democratic governments have kept a consistent and coherent grand strategy toward China. So my answer is quite simple and clear. Yes, the U.S. has grand strategy and formal and written grand strategy. Okay, and just now I was saying something about I have spoken something about the U.S. politics. Right now, I want to focus on China. I have also received a question list from Frank about China. There are more questions about China than about the U.S. These questions are great and very interesting. The first one, which have been the conditions for China's great success during the last decades? This is a good question. I think there is no doubt that China has made huge achievements over 4 decades since the start of the reform and open campaign in 1978. China has made a huge success. When I was young, China was very poor. Was probably the poorest country in the world. I think poorer than African countries. I still remember my childhood. The life is really very hard. But now China is very powerful. China is the second largest economy of the world. And China has formidable military power. And when it comes to technology, China is very innovative, okay? So China is a powerful country right now. When it comes to economy, China is only second to the United States. But if we are using the purchase power, China is more than United States. Since 2014, China is more than the United States. If we are talking about purchase power, okay. So there is no doubt that China has made a great success over the past decades. But there must be some reasons and conditions. So that's why I believe the question is great. So what are the conditions of China's?
Xiaoting, could you please proceed with the presentation?
Oh, okay.
There is still the US to be
Yeah.
seen here. Okay,
Yes.
there it
Yeah.
is.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. I think there are three conditions for China's great success. The first is a favorable international environment. This is really important. During the Cold War era, China was in very bad international environment. China has fought against both superpower. Okay, China had a bad relationship with both Soviet Union and the United States. Of course, U.S. Has been the enemy of the People's Republic of China for a long time. This is understandable. China is a socialist country, and the U.S. is a capitalist country. And from China's perspective, the U.S. is trying to stop China from uniting Taiwan. Okay, and Taiwan is the core interest of China, so that's why China has had a very bad relationship with the U.S. Both China and the U.S. are enemies. But China has also fought with Soviet Union in 1969, and the Soviet Union has tried to use nuclear weapon to attack China. So that's why China fought against both superpowers. The situation is very bad and dangerous for China. So that's why China has China has had a bad international environment. This is not good for economic development. But since 1972, the situation has changed. President Richard Nixon visited China, and he established a good relationship with China, and the U.S. Drive a wedge between China and the Soviet Union, right? And China has seized that opportunity. Since 1978, the great Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping launched the campaign of economic development. It's called as reform and opening up. Therefore, China has achieved unprecedented economic development and success in the human history, I think, from my perspective. So first, it's the international environment is favorable to China. The U.S. as well as Western countries are trying very hard to integrate China to the international economic system. The U.S. has allowed China to join WTO in 2001. Since 2001, China's economic growth is fast, very fast, unbelievably fast. So I do believe China has benefited from the globalization. China is probably the biggest beneficiary of the globalization. This is the first condition. And second, we must realize that Chinese leadership is very strong, very smart, very cautious. I mean, so they have achieved long-time domestic political stability. This is important for the economic development. Actually, all countries, if you want to achieve economic success, you must have a stable political environment. There is no exception. Other East Asian countries, they have similar success, like South Korea, Japan, they have achieved economic success before China. All of them have maintained political stability. China is a huge country. Okay, it's not easy to keep political stability, but the Chinese leadership, the ruling party, have achieved that. So this is a great achievement from my point of view. This is important condition for long-term economic development, domestic political stability. And the last reason or condition for me, it's demographic dividend. During the first during the era of Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao is the first great leader of the People's Republic of China. He has encouraged the people to have more babies. Okay, yes. During the rule of Chairman Mao, China was poor, but he has prepared a condition for China's economic development. He has prepared the condition for China's economic miracle. China has a huge population. China is the most populous country in the world, and Chinese people are very disciplined, very hardworking, and very smart, and very flexible, very active. So the demographic dividend has contributed to Chinese economic development or not, from my perspective. Next question. Do you think that there is a specific China model or China playbook? Yes. On the one hand, China has achieved unprecedented economic success during the past decades. It's really unbelievable, unprecedented from my perspective. And China is now the biggest manufacturer of the world. Probably the manufacturing industry of China has produced 1/3 production of the entire world, much more than the US, Germany, Japan combined. Okay, so this is a tremendous economic miracle of China. But on the other hand, I don't believe there is a specific Chinese model, China model, China playbook. China is not unique. China cannot escape from the laws of economics from my point of view. China is the same as other countries. If you want to achieve economic development, you need political stability. You need a favorable international environment. You need people. You need a human resource. So this is the same for all the countries. China is not the exception. China has achieved economic success because China has effectively and efficiently used its resource and tools. If we are talking about the economic growth of China over the past 4 decades, but before 1978, why has not China not achieved such success? I think China has followed the economic law because before 1978, Chinese economy is the so-called socialist planning economy. It's not efficient. It's not efficient, and Chinese leadership has recognized the problem. In order to save the regime, in order to keep the survival of the regime, they have no choice but to launch economic reform. So after 1978, the United States has pursued a friendly foreign policy to China, and China has seized that opportunity. China has reformed its economy. In the past, it's highly controlled planning economy. But since 1978, China has loosened its control over economy, society, and even individual people. So this is following the economic law. This is not against the economic law. So that's why China has achieved a huge success. Many people believe The reason of China's economic success is that China has very strong political control over the society and the economy because of the power concentration, because of the title control. My explanation is opposite. China has achieved its economic success because it has loosened its control over the society, people, and the economy. That's why. If you change the trend, I believe China will have huge problems and challenges. Right now, it's happening. Okay? And the next question, which are the major challenges China has to face in my perspective? Just now, I have talked about some challenges facing China right now. I think the international environment has changed. Over the past, the U.S. tried to integrate China to the international system. The U.S. wants to change Chinese political system. They want to make China more liberal. They want to make China closer to Western countries, but they have failed. That's why the U.S. has changed its foreign policy toward China. In the past, maybe the U.S. has pursued containment and engagement policy toward China simultaneously. But right now, the U.S. has labeled China as the number one strategic competitor. This means the U.S. Attitude and position toward China has changed fundamentally, and we cannot ignore the influence of power of the U.S. It's still the number one superpower of the world. U.S. is still very powerful, formidable, because U.S. has changed its position to China. I mean, the international environment has changed. China is facing deteriorating international environment. This is probably the number one challenge for the Chinese leadership and, of course, for China's economy. So this is my understanding. And second, we have discussed Chinese economic success, but on the other hand, Chinese economic development model has problems. The former Chinese Prime Minister Wen Jiabao has made it very clear Chinese economic model is unsustainable because China's economy has heavily relied on property development. And Chinese economy has heavily relied on manufacturing industry. And Chinese domestic consumption is quite low compared to other countries. So this is a fundamental and structural problem of Chinese economic development. I have not seen any signs that China has changed its economic development model. I think this is a huge challenge for China. So second problem of Chinese economy is the development model must be changed accordingly. Right now, it's still unsustainable. Right now, the manufacturing industry of China is very strong. Yes, on the one hand, China has achieved huge trade surplus. I have seen the news from January to November in this year, 2025. The trade surplus of China is more than $1 trillion. So this is evidence of the power of Chinese manufacturing industry. But on the other hand, this means China is competing against the rest of the world, not only US and Europe, but also other developing countries. Chinese manufacturing industry is too powerful. So this is unsustainable for China's economic development. China has to find a way to increase its domestic consumption. Okay. And the next challenge is demographic crisis. I think probably you know the problem of China's demographic. China has the so-called one-child policy. Since 1970s, China has implemented the one-child policy very strictly, very strictly. And now the consequence is increasingly serious for China, not only for the economy, but also for the society. The demographic challenge is huge because China is different from other developed countries. Yes, other developed countries like Germany, like Japan, like other European countries, they are also becoming aging. Okay, their society are aging, but they are already developed countries. They are already rich countries. They have very good social. They have very good social safety network, like pension, like healthcare. They have very good system. But right now, China is still a developing country. But China is already becoming aging. So this is a very serious challenge for China, demographic crisis, I would say. And next question, do you think that China will be able to continue with this success story in longer term? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not in the position to make any prediction. I think China has demonstrated its flexibility and flexibility over the past. I hope China can address these challenges in the future. So it depends on whether China can effectively address the domestic and international challenges. Same as other countries, China has huge challenges and difficulties, both domestically and internationally. So I don't know whether the Chinese leadership and the Chinese people and the Chinese society and the Chinese enterprise can address these challenges. I hope so because I'm a Chinese. And next question, do you feel that there is any ambition for a China-led world order? And if so, how could it look like? This is interesting. I think before the current Chinese leadership, before President Xi, the Chinese leadership was very cautious when it comes to China's foreign strategy. Deng Xiaoping has made it very clear China should keep a low profile on the world stage. China should focus on economic development. China should not be the leader. China should not claim the leadership. China should be cautious. The number one priority is economic development. I think then under the other leaders like Zhang and Hu, they have kept same approach. China has maintained no profile on the world stage. But the current leadership has changed the approach a little bit. And right now, China is quite ambitious. China has launched Belt and Road Initiative. This is an ambitious project. And China has made several different initiatives like the Global Security Initiative, Global Development Initiative, Global Civilization Initiative. Okay. And most importantly, China is pushing very hard for its idea of the community with a shared future for mankind. China is pushing very hard, and the Belt and Road Initiative is one instrument of this idea. China is trying to push the so-called the community with a shared future for mankind. From my perspective, this idea is very idealistic, very idealistic. In some sense, it's very liberal. It's very liberal. It's similar to some liberal ideas of the international order, but the response for the idea of the community with a shared future for mankind is very different. For many countries, this is welcome, but for other countries, especially the US and the Western countries, this is the evidence that China is trying to challenge the current international order. China is trying to replace the US hegemony, right? So, and the Belt and Road Initiative and the other projects are the evidence. So probably this is against China's expectations. This is not what China wants, but the consequence is that China is pushing very hard for a new international order, the community with a shared future for mankind. But the response from Western countries, especially the United States, is not positive. So this is a challenge for China, I think. And next question, in which areas do you see the main source of current or future conflicts? This is interesting. Yes, I have mentioned that the relationship between US and China has become very complex. On the one hand, the US is still the large market of Chinese products, but on the other hand, the two countries are entering the era of strategic competition. Yeah, I think China is already in Cold War with China. For many people, maybe the Cold War, the Cold War is a very simple idea. It's a simplified idea about the world situation, but I think Cold War 2.0 is probably ongoing because right now China and the US has structural conflicts economically, geopolitically, and ideologically, and militarily. The two superpowers have fundamental conflict over many issues. This is a structural change, and we cannot change that direction. Okay, the two countries have too many problems and too many conflicts, but they want to avoid a military fight, a military war, because the consequence is too high. For both countries, the consequence is too high. That's why both US and China want to avoid a military conflict, right? So, but they have structural problems. On one hand, both China and the US has a structural conflict. On the other hand, they want to avoid a military fight. Therefore, they have no choice but to enter the Cold War. But this is Cold War II. It's different from the Cold War I between the US and the Soviet Union. That time, the US and the Soviet Union have fought against each other for almost half century. They fought against each other in the dimensions of ideology and military field. So the main characteristics of Cold War I is ideological struggle and arms race, right? So the Soviet Union has Marxism, communism, socialism, and the Western countries under the leadership of the United States has liberal ideas and capitalism. Okay, so there is a fierce struggle, ideological struggle between Soviet Union and the United States. And in addition, they have arms. They have had a long time arms race, right? Especially in the field of nuclear arsenal, right? But right now, the Sino-American Cold War is a little bit different. First, I don't think there is the same ideological struggle like the previous one. Right now, the US is not very interested in ideology, especially under Trump administration. If you have read the National Security Strategy document, which was published 2 weeks ago, so you will find no words about ideology, about Western values, about universal values. It's a realistic document, okay, with realistic language. So the U.S. is no longer interested in ideology. And for China, for me, China has neither willingness nor capabilities of launching an ideological struggle against the United States. China has no universal ideology. China is different from Soviet Union. China has no motivation to export revolution or its economic development model around the world. China is very different from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union has tried very hard to expand its ideology worldwide. The US, the Soviet Union has exported its ideology. Actually, the founding of the People's Republic of China is one result of the Soviet Union foreign policy. They exported Leninism, Marxism-Leninism, and communism to Asia, and they have helped to found the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, I mean the Soviet Union has exported its ideology, but China is not doing that. China is neither in the position. China has neither the willingness nor the capabilities to export its ideology. So this is the first difference. A second difference, I think China is much more powerful than the former Soviet Union. And between China and the US, there is very strong economic tie between China and the US. This is the second difference. And China is very advanced in technology, in science and technology. So that's why I believe the US-China strategic competition can be perceived as Cold War 2.0. And the main battlefield will be for economy, technology, and geopolitical advantage rather than ideology and arms race. This is the difference between Cold War II and Cold War. We have seen the trade war between China and the US since the second term of Trump administration. Okay, and we have seen the fierce technological competition between China and the US, especially for AI, quantum computing, and other advanced technologies. For ideological struggle, I don't think it plays important role. Of course, there is still ideological struggle between China and the US, but probably it will not be the main battlefield. An arms race, yes, there will be arms race between China and the US, but it's not as fierce as the Cold War One, because right now the US still has tremendous advantage toward China when it comes to nuclear arsenals, right? Okay. And next question, do you see a Chinese grand strategy? My quick answer is yes. China has a grand strategy, but it's different from that of the United States. The US has a formal and documented grand strategy. It's national security strategy. Each and every administration has a national security strategy. China has no official document, which is named as grand strategy. But China is well positioned for grand strategy. Why? Because China has a very powerful government. Chinese Communist Party is a Leninist party, which is centralized, which is in the position to control and mobilize all resources of China, all resources, economic, military, culture, everything. China's government is much more powerful than its American counterpart. Okay, so China has powerful state-owned enterprise. They can be the instrument of Chinese foreign policy. For example, Belt and Road Initiative. China has mobilized its powerful state-owned enterprise and banks for that economic strategy, from my point of view. And China has very strong and tight control over its society and its people. China can do anything if China's leadership can do anything if they want. This is very different from American political system, which has both ruling party and opposition party. And the American society is very diverse, and they have independent media. Okay, there is checks and balance inside the U.S. Political system, but China's political philosophy is very different. Power concentration is a high priority, and China has capable leadership, a Leninist party, which is the center of the political system. The party is the leadership. Party can do anything if they want. So that's why China is better positioned for grand strategy than the United States. China has a 5-year plan. This can be perceived a grand strategy. China has many other strategies like the Belt and Road Initiative and some other domestic development strategies. So, China has a grand strategy, but it's not documented. But China is better positioned for grand strategy. This is clear from my point of view. And the next question, this is a long question, but very interesting. The world trade system has hardly longer support of the US. Do you observe that not only American, but also European companies will enter more and more in competition with Chinese products in a way that market openness becomes an increasing challenge instead of an opportunity? Do you think that in consequence it becomes more difficult for European companies to rely on the liberal order as we know it? This is a good question. This is non question, but a good question. My simple answer is yes. Just now I have emphasized the change over the past decades. For me, the globalization is over. The past liberal globalization is over. Now is the era of economic statecraft, or the so-called geoeconomics. As we know, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the US as well as Western countries have launched the hyper-globalization. The Western countries are trying to integrate its former adversaries into that liberal international order, including Russia. So Russia was one member of G8. Of course, the membership was cancelled after its invasion in 2014. Okay, if I'm not wrong. And the US has allowed China to join WTO, and India and other developing countries, okay, they have been integrated into the international economic system. So the globalization is everywhere. It seems that the free flow of technology, of people, of goods, of information has been achieved, right? So, but since 2017, I would say since 2017, this is over. In 2017, the Trump administration has published its national security strategy. According to that strategy, the war on terror is over. Now the geopolitics has returned. Now the great power politics has returned. So what does it mean? It means the economic cooperation is no longer win-win. Okay, the interdependence of the economic interdependence between countries are being changed. Many countries, especially great powers, are trying to use their economic means to achieve their political purpose. This is called as the weaponization of interdependence. There are plenty of examples. China has used its control over rare earths to fight against the U.S. The U.S. economic war, I would say, and for Trump administration and even Biden administration, they have also used economic means for political purpose. For example, Trump has used tariff as his most powerful economic weapon against the entire world, right? So this is evidence of the weaponization of interdependence. Not only China, but also not only China and the U.S., but also countries like the European countries has used economic weapons against Russia since the invasion of Russia, since the invasion of Ukraine launched by Russia. The European countries, together with the U.S., have imposed serious, strict economic sanctions against Russia. They want to destroy the economic foundation of Russia's war machine. So this is also evidence of the weaponization of interdependence. So I would say that the international environment has changed. In the past, we can benefit from economic cooperation, right? So, but now this era is over. I think the era of liberal globalization has ended. Now people are more and more talking about economic weapon. This is the research topics of economic statecraft or geoeconomics. This means that economic means can be used for political objectives, not only for economic gains, okay, but also for political strategy. For example, China wants to expand its influence over around the world. That's why China has used its most powerful weapons. China's investment in infrastructure. So this is an economic weapon of China to expand its influence. Of course, people can also use economic means for coercion, like the control over rare earths, like the ban of semiconductor chip, many examples. So in the past, it's different. In the past, it's globalization, but it's outsourcing. But right now, I think this has changed. More and more countries are talking about friend shoring. Friend shoring. This is interesting. It means that the Western countries will no longer invest in countries like China intensively like the past, because China is now labeled as a strategic competitor of the U.S. I don't think the U.S. will invest heavily in China continually. I think many countries are talking about friend shoring. Friend shoring. This means they will strengthen their economic ties, but with like-minded countries between Europe and Japan and U.S., maybe Canada and Australia as well. So this is a big change from my point of view. And under such a circumstance, I think the government will enhance and strengthen its involvement in the economy. This means that the Western countries will learn from China. They will pursue industrial policy. Industrial policy. This is happening in all Western countries, in Germany, in Japan, in other European countries, even in the United States. The U.S. has a tradition of being liberal, free market economy. Okay, but right now the U.S. government is more and more involved in economy, like the Trump administration is trying very hard to strengthen U.S. manufacturing power, and many other examples. So, I mean, today the situation has changed. The economic ties can be weaponized for political purpose. So this is my understanding. This is my answer. This is my answer for the questions. So again, thank you very much for raising such questions. They are great questions, very interesting. So I have answered from my personal perspective. This is not a Chinese perspective because China is big, and many Chinese, even within Chinese leadership, their opinion are diverse. I think for Chinese society, civil society, for the Chinese individual persons, they have different, they have diverse opinions. I cannot represent the Chinese perspective. This is my personal perspective. So thank you. This is my answer to these questions. I look forward to intensive discussion with you guys.
Thank you very much, Jiaoting, for going along all these questions. I think you gave very understandable answers on these very difficult questions, and I think we are in the middle, in the core of the whole discussion about the future of China and how to deal with China and how to build up win-win relationships for the future. You mentioned one of the greatest problems that is that China has become a peer competitor of the United States because of China's great success. China has become more powerful, much more competitive on international markets, and especially on US markets. And therefore, the US has become very, very reluctant. And we know that the US is accusing China not to be compatible with the World Trade System and the WTO because of the special interaction with the private sector and the state. So the US trade representative is arguing that China is a state-driven economy in comparison to the United States and the Western world, and that does not fit together. And so they cannot support the system any longer and feel that they have to move away. So that's the argumentation we hear from the US. And then the question occurs, what makes China so successful? I think the US are right. They are focusing on the special relationship between the private sector and the nation state. And that's tremendously provocative if you think about that. So we, so to say, from the Western world, we believe that the state should step back, should be reluctant, should give the floor to the private sector at least. And China is doing the opposite. There we have a lot of state interventions. And after having said that, could you give us some insights? For us, it's so difficult to see what is happening inside China, but how is this special relationship between the private sector and the state is looking like? How does the state intervene in order to hence internal competition that makes China at least so strong on the international level? So competition, successful competition in the internal side is always seen as an opportunity to gain a better international competition. And could you give us some examples how this interaction is working? It is very difficult for us to understand that. Do you have an example? As I observed it, we have a very, very competitive situation inside China between the different companies, in the families, between the children, the students, and it's rough, I think, but it's successful. And could you give us some greater insights there to better understand the whole system?
Yes, thank you, Frank. This is a very complex question, in my opinion. China is labeled as a systemic rival by European countries. In 2019, China was first labeled as a systemic rival by Germany first, and then by the European Commission, and then by the entire community of the Western countries. What does it mean, systemic rival? This means that the Chinese economic model is different from the liberal market economy of the Western countries. This means Chinese government has a strong control over its economy, and Chinese government can mobilize the resource of the entire country to compete against Western enterprise. For many Western enterprise, for example, for German enterprise, they believe this is unfair, and Chinese government has subsidies, and China has known its currency exchange rate, and many other obstacles. That means the European and the Western enterprise are not in the position to compete against China as one country. So they are not competing against the Chinese enterprise, but compete against China. So that's why there is a systemic rival between China and the Western countries. But I don't think. But I think the situation, the reality is much more complex. Actually, China has very active private economy, very active private economy. As far as I know, 70% manpower are engaged with private sector. Only 30% labor force are working in state-owned enterprise. But the change is different. I mean, over the past, China has tried very hard to loosen its control over economy. That's why China has achieved a huge economic success, as I have emphasized. But since 2008, I think, since 2008, before President Xi took office, China has changed its trend. China has strengthened its state-owned enterprise, especially some central state-owned enterprise. And now I think Chinese leadership is paying more attention to state-owned enterprise. We are seeing the consequence. The growth of Chinese economy has slowed down. Okay, has slowed down, and the interaction between the private sectors and the government and the state-owned enterprise is becoming more complex. I think the state-owned enterprise in China still have huge privilege. They can receive more. They can receive loans from state-owned banks more easily, and I don't know. I'm not an expert on Chinese economy, but if you look at the Chinese economy, you cannot think from purely economic perspective, because China is a very politicized country. You have to look at the economy from political perspective. I think for current Chinese leadership, the manufacturing industry is important. The high technology industry is important, and the state control over the economy is important. That's why they have changed the direction of economic reform. So that's why the Western countries are not satisfied with the change. China is not becoming more liberal from their perspective. Okay, so this is my observation. I'm not sure if I have answered your questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Xiaoting. Which are your comments or your questions, please? Ella, please.
I have a question as through my previous work, I had the chance to work with customs in China. So, what would you see? So, from a point of a country strategy, and I think you probably have researched more than what we know, so we rely on your insights. What would be the internal strategy or vision towards removing concerns? So, for example, we know the growth has happened tremendously from 2001, but there have been concerns for different regions, for example, in China. And there are some areas which are not very well developed or would not be to maybe what other Western country or other countries will have in mind. So, for example, the suspicions or considerations for labor conditions in some regions. So looking at the whole growth plan over the past 24 years and with the strategy in mind for China for the next 10 years, let's say, what are there any internal conversations on how to tackle this? Because I presume it might cause a bit of friction from like supply chains and diversity and having global customers.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah, of course, the relationship between China and the rest of the world is complex. And China has realized that its economic success has has resulted in some problems. Not every country is satisfied with China's economic success. And China is trying to improve its image in the world. China is trying very hard to improve its image. And China is doing a lot to improve its relationship with the rest of the world. I would say that. For example, Belt and Road Initiative. China has invested more than 1 trillion US dollar in BRI around the world. For the first session of today's lecture, we have discussed China-Pakistan economic corridor. Actually, this is a flagship project of Belt and Road Initiative. You can imagine China has invested 1 trillion US dollar in economic cooperation and development with global South countries. Okay, this is tremendous. As one opposite example, the United States has invested $6 trillion, but not in economic development, but in wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The U.S. has started 2 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. According to the former president of the U.S., Jimmy Carter, U.S. has spent more than $6 trillion US for nothing. For nothing. They have gained nothing from the 6 trillion US donors. So this is a comparison between China and the US. China has used its economic resource and tools for cooperation with other global South countries. Of course, the people accuse China of having strategic purpose, geopolitical objective. This is understandable. But on the other hand, for the global South countries, they have more choice than previously. All country wants to have economic development, but you need technology, you need know-how, you need capital. Okay. In the past, the only source of such things are the Western countries, including Japan, and they have very strict demands. For example, if you want to receive economic aid from the U.S., you have to meet the strict criteria such as transparency, good governance, rule of law, human rights, and so on. But right now they have a new choice, China. So right now, China is an alternative provider of technology, know-how, and capital. So this is good for global South countries, I think, because they have more choice. This means they have more leverage. Okay, and Chinese leadership understands if they want to continue China's economic success, they should have a peaceful and stable international environment. But something is out of their control, right? The U.S. has perceived China as number one strategic competitor. I don't think China can change the U.S. Perception toward China. So I expect there will be more intensive competition between U.S. and China. This is Cold War 2.0. And for Cold War 1, it has lasted half century. For Cold War II, I think this is same. This will be a non-game, okay, non-game. American scholar Rush Dosh has written one famous book, Non-Game. He has described the Sino-American strategic competition as non-game. So this is my understanding. I'm not sure if I have answered your question.
Yeah, I'm in the grand picture, yes. And I look forward to see what the developments are. I think China has grown, and from my own personal experience, the technicality and the technology and work capabilities, it's in many situations unique, and China has become a leader in this aspect. But it's just from the category of products I was dealing with.
I have a look at the time. Are there any questions from your side? Kurosh?
Yes, I have a question. Today's discussion was more political than economic. I have a political question. Chinese is accused of, exploiting sanctioned countries' situation, especially regarding Iran, for example. China is the only country that buy Iranian oil discounted, and Iranian regime is, suppressing its own people, uh, supporting terrorist groups in the region. What is your uh, stand on, from moral perspective on this issue?
It's difficult to think from moral perspective because this is about ideology. This is a zero-sum game, okay? This is about evil and good. But I think more and more countries are viewing international relations from a realistic perspective. I think this is happening in the United States. I have read the national security strategy of Trump administration very carefully for several times. The Trump administration is promoting realistic thinking about international relations. So basically, I'm a realist. So for me, moral perspective is important and necessary, but it's difficult to reach a consensus if you see the international relation from moral perspective. You are right that I think you are right. China and Iran have cooperation. Actually, as far as I know, China has signed one framework agreement with Iran for 25 years and 400 billion US dollars. 25 years, 400 billion US dollars. This is a huge cooperation project between China and Iran. I don't want to judge it from moral perspective, but I want to analyze it from geopolitical perspective, because the U.S. has labeled China as #1 strategic competitor. China has no choice, actually. China has no choice but to work closely with other U.S. opponents like Iran, like North Korea, like Russia, like Venezuela, like Cuba. From international relations perspective, you have no choice. And the U.S. is the most powerful country of the world. China is facing huge, tremendous pressure from the U.S. side. So in order to survival, I think in order to survive, China wants to work with Iran and Russia and North Korea. This is understandable. Actually, U.S. has realized that the U.S. strategists have predicted that. I'm not sure if you know a U.S. Strategist. He has died. His name is Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was the national security advisor of President Jimmy Carter. He has written one famous book in 1997. The name of the book is Grand Chessboard. He has made it very clear the hegemony of the U.S. has precondition. What is that precondition? It's the divide of Eurasia continent. That means the Eurasia continent cannot be dominated by any country, because that dominant country will have the resource and power to attack the U.S. when they control the entire Eurasia continent. So that's why the U.S. has always encouraged the diversification of the Eurasia continent. And he has predicted that a coalition between China, Russia, and Iran will be geopolitical nightmare for the United States. I think this is happening. China, Russia, and Iran are working more and more closely. This is the consequence of the U.S. foreign policy. Actually, the three countries, China, Russia, and Iran, are very different. They have different ideologies. Culturally, they are very different. They are different from the Western countries. Between Europe and the US, you have similar ideology, similar values. But Iran, Russia, and China are very, very different. They are united because they face common pressure from the United States. Therefore, they have no choice but to be united. So I think if the United States wants to avoid the cooperation between China and Iran and Russia, it has to change its foreign policy. I think the Trump administration is doing that. Trump has demonstrated its friendly attitude toward Russia. So if Trump can achieve the peaceful end of the Ukraine war, I think the relationship between Russia and U.S. will be improved, and therefore U.S. is able to drive a wedge between Russia and China. So for relationship between China and Iran, it's the same. I think if the U.S. pursues a realistic foreign strategy, then these countries have no motivation to work together because they will have no fear of regime change. Actually, China, Iran, and Russia are afraid of common revolution or not. So they are afraid of the regime change launched by the United States.
Our time is running. Let me only ask you a final question, Xiaoting. There is much talk about containing China, and in the eyes of many observers, it's necessary to de-risk from China. Do you think that it's possible that it is a realistic strategy to try to de-risk from China or to contain China? So we are so dependent from supply chains going through China, from interaction with China. Is China the indispensable nation? So many times the US was called the indispensable nation. Is China the real indispensable nation, and will China rise at least peacefully? Can we rely on China in future?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question. I'm not sure if the containment strategy will succeed. So for the U.S., Americans are probably very confident they can win Cold War II as they won Cold War I. They are very confident, but I'm not so confident because China is also very powerful. China is very capable, and China's leadership is very smart, and they can be very flexible. They can adjust to the new situation. So that's why I'm not sure if the U.S. can win the Cold War II again. I'm not sure. But when it comes to de-risking, I think this is happening. This is not a yes or no. This is happening. All the Western countries, including Japan and Australia, they are implementing de-risking strategy toward China. The U.S. Is doing that. The European countries is doing that. The European countries are doing that. Japan has pursued de-risking long time ago. I think in 2010, China had a conflict with Japan over Diaoyu Island. In China, it's called as Diaoyu Island. In Japan, it's called as Senkaku. China and Japan had a huge and fierce conflict, and China has imposed a sanction against Japan. China has stopped the export of rare earths to Japan. That's why Japan has realized the danger. Japan has established one ministry of economic security. So now the dependency of Japan on Chinese rare earths has reduced from almost 100% to 60%. This is called as economic security. Japan is now a role model for both U.S. and European countries, including Germany. Germany wants to learn from Japan for implementing economic security when it comes to China. So, I mean, the reality is that all the Western countries are trying to de-risk from China, but they have different approach. Like Germany, we are in Germany. Germany has published its China strategy, I think 3 years ago by the coalition government. They had a China strategy. They want to implement de-risking. For example, they have China plus one approach. This means they have to diversify the supply chain not only in China, but also in other Asian countries, they don't want to decouple from China because Chinese market is still attractive, and they have made a lot of money. Like the German car makers, they have made a huge money from Chinese market. So they don't want to decouple from China, but they want to diversify the dependency. They have China plus one country, maybe other countries like Vietnam, like India can be the additional place for their supply chain. This is one method. A second method is in China for China. For example, Volkswagen has achieved that strategy in China for China. This means the Chinese business will be separate from its global system. The Chinese business is independent. So I mean, general industries are preparing for the future conflict with China. For example, in the future, if the war in Taiwan Strait breaks out, this will be very consequential for Western companies. So that's why they have in China for China strategy. This means the loss in Chinese market will not impact other business. This is a vote of distrust because they believe the relationship with China can be broken. So they are preparing for that day. So that's why they have China plus one. They have in China for China strategy. Have you heard about in US for US? No. Have you heard about in Japan for Japan? In India for India? No. Because Japan, US, and India are the like-minded countries of Germany. And they are one part of their global business. They don't need to separate the business in Japan from its global business, right? But for China, they are pursuing the in China for China strategy. So that's why I think this is a demonstration of distrust. Okay, so because the economy is related to geopolitics, the geopolitical context has changed fundamentally. The companies have no choice but to follow the geopolitical change. Okay, I think Germany has established a diplomatic relationship with People's Republic of China in 1972. Before 1972, there was no economic tie between Federal Republic of Germany and the People's Republic of China. But then German enterprise have come to China and invested in China. But now China is perceived as a systemic rival of Western countries. This is a fundamental geopolitical change. This will have consequence for economy and many other areas. I think so.
Thank you very much, Xiaoting, for answering these questions and above all for sharing your great insights here with you. I think we have a better understanding of China, how things are working there, and about China's strategies in this conflict between the great powers and the changing geopolitical situation we are currently in. Xiaoting, thanks a lot for being with us today, for your ongoing support, and we wish you seasonal greetings, and let's stay in touch. And this was a great discussion with you. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And thank
Bye-bye.
you, friends.
Let's have a 5 minutes break and then be back in the room.